The summer heat was suffocating that day, the kind that makes your shirt stick to your back and makes you wish you were anywhere else. Michael wiped the sweat from his forehead, his calloused hands telling stories of years spent saving lives in places most people couldn't even point to on a map. Growing up in a small town wasn't easy. His family didn't have much, but they had something more valuable than money: a deep respect for service and community. His dad, a local auto mechanic, and his mom, a school librarian, always talked about doing the right thing, even when it wasn't the easy thing. Michael remembered the day he decided to become a medic. It wasn't some dramatic movie moment. It was during a high school football game when a player got seriously injured. While others froze, he jumped into action, using the basic first aid skills his scout leader had taught him. The way he kept calm, the way he helped that player, something clicked inside him. The military wasn't just a job for him. It was a calling. He wasn't looking for glory or medals. He wanted to make a difference, to be the person who could help someone during their worst moment. His first deployment changed him forever. The dust, the tension, the constant noise of helicopters and distant explosions. It wasn't like the movies. It was raw, real, and unbelievably intense. Combat medics don't just treat wounds. They're part counselor, part warrior, part guardian angel. Michael had seen things that would break most people. He treated soldiers who'd lost limbs, comforted those who thought they wouldn't make it home, and held on to hope when everything seemed impossible. Coming back home wasn't easy. Many think the war ends when you leave the battlefield. But for Michael, the battle continued in his mind. Nightmares, sudden loud noises, the constant replay of moments he wished he could forget. These were his invisible scars. But he found healing in helping others. Working at the military hospital wasn't just a job. It was his way of continuing to serve, of making sure every veteran got the care and respect they deserved. Each patient was more than a medical record. They were someone's son, daughter, parent, or friend. His colleagues respected him not just for his medical skills, but for his ability to listen. He had this unusual talent of making people feel safe just by being in the same room. Veterans would open up to him about things they'd never tell their families or other medical staff. That particular day started like any other. The hospital corridors hummed with the usual activity. Nurses rushing between rooms, doctors discussing patient charts, and the constant beep of medical equipment. Michael moved through this organized chaos with the same precision he'd learned in war zones. Little did he know that today would be different. Today would test everything he believed about courage, respect, and standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. The bikers arriving would change everything, not just for him, but for an entire community that had no idea what was about to unfold. As he adjusted his badge and checked his watch, a distant rumble of motorcycles began to grow louder. Something was about to happen. And Michael, with all his training and experience, was ready, though he couldn't possibly predict how this day would become a turning point in his life. The evening was thick with tension, the kind you could almost touch. Those motorcycle engines weren't just loud. They were a statement. A rough, aggressive declaration that something was about to change. 3 massive bikes rolled into the hospital parking lot, chrome gleaming under the setting sun. The riders looked like they'd stepped out of every tough guy movie. Leather jackets despite the heat, bandanas covering part of their faces, tattoos peeking out from every possible angle. But these weren't movie characters. These were real people with real attitudes, and they were looking for trouble. Inside the hospital, everything seemed normal at first. Elderly veterans sat quietly in the waiting area, some reading newspapers, others just staring into space. Some wore caps marking their service: Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm. Each of them had stories etched into their weathered faces, stories of sacrifice most people would never understand. The first sign of trouble came with a sudden change in atmosphere. The automatic doors swung open with a harsh whoosh, and the entire room seemed to collectively hold its breath. The gang's leader, a guy with arms covered in intricate tattoos and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. Swagger was impossible to miss. His name was known in the local circles, a reputation built on causing problems and walking away without consequences. Tonight felt different. Something in his walk suggested he wasn't just there to create a minor disturbance. An old veteran in a wheelchair caught his eye first. The man was probably in his late 70s, wearing a faded military pin that spoke of years of service. Most people would see a frail elderly person, but the biker saw something else, a target. The waiting room, just moments ago a picture of quiet patience, started transforming. Whispers replaced silence. A nurse at the reception desk subtly pressed a button, her hands trembling slightly. Everyone knew trouble was brewing, but nobody wanted to be the first to react. The gang spread out, their presence filling the space like a dark cloud. They weren't just standing. They were occupying territory. Each movement was calculated, designed to intimidate. Young veterans receiving treatment looked nervous. The older ones? They'd seen worse and weren't about to show fear. One of the younger bikers, probably in his 20s, started making loud comments. Inappropriate jokes. Deliberately provocative language designed to get a reaction. Some veterans looked down, trying to avoid confrontation. Others gripped their walking aids a little tighter, decades of military discipline keeping them steady. The hospital staff watched, caught between protocol and genuine concern. Security was on its way, but in these moments, seconds feel like hours. The veterans in the room, men and women who had faced enemies in war zones, now found themselves facing a different kind of threat on home soil. Michael, still at the nurse's station, watched everything unfold. His military training meant he was processing every detail. The body language, the potential exit points, the vulnerable people in the room. He wasn't just seeing a disruption. He was seeing a potential threat that needed careful management. Something was about to break. The tension was like a rubber band stretched to its absolute limit. One wrong move, one misplaced word, and everything could explode into chaos. And then that moment arrived. The biker leader made a move that would change everything. A move that would bring Michael from being an observer to becoming the central figure in a showdown nobody saw coming. The world seemed to slow down for a moment. One of the older veterans, a man with silver hair and a prosthetic leg, became the unexpected focal point of the brewing storm. He was sitting quietly, his weathered hands folded neatly on his walker, completely unaware that he was about to become the center of a dangerous situation. The biker gang's leader, with a build like a bulldozer and eyes that had seen too many hard streets, fixed his gaze on the elderly veteran. Something about the old man's quiet dignity seemed to irritate him. Maybe it was the military pin on his jacket. Maybe it was the respect that seemed to radiate from him without even trying. When the first shove happened, it was so quick most people didn't even see it coming. The biker's hand pushed against the veteran's walker, sending it slightly off balance. The old man wobbled, his years of discipline the only thing keeping him from falling completely. The waiting room went dead silent. Veterans from different generations exchanged glances. Some were too old to physically intervene. Others were dealing with their own medical treatments. But something united them, a shared understanding of respect, of honor, of protecting those who can't protect themselves. A young veteran in a wheelchair, both legs lost in combat, gripped the armrests so tight his knuckles turned white. His eyes told a story of controlled anger, of battles fought both outside and inside himself. The hospital walls had seen many stories, but this felt different. The hospital staff watched, caught in that terrible moment between professional protocol and human instinct. The receptionist's hand hovered near the security button. A young nurse took an involuntary step forward, then stopped herself. But this wasn't about heroics. This was about basic human decency. The biker seemed to enjoy the reaction. His leather jacket, covered in patches that told stories of road trips and rebellious moments, seemed to puff up with a twisted sense of pride. He was looking for a reaction, searching for someone to challenge him. What he didn't realize was that the hospital wasn't just a building. It was a sanctuary for those who had given everything. Every veteran there, regardless of age or physical condition, carried a lifetime of training. Every staff member understood the unwritten code of protecting those who had served. Michael watched from a few feet away. His entire body was calm, but his eyes were processing everything. Years of medical training and military experience had taught him that confrontations are won long before the first punch is thrown. It's about presence, about understanding, about showing that you're not afraid, but also not looking for unnecessary conflict. The old veteran himself, he didn't look scared. There was something in his eyes, a quiet strength that came from surviving things most people couldn't imagine. He adjusted his jacket, revealing a glimpse of a military decoration that spoke volumes about his past. The room was a powder keg. One spark could set everything off. The bikers knew it. The veterans knew it. The hospital staff knew it. And then, everything changed. The biker leader took one more step forward, his intention clear. This wasn't just about intimidation anymore. This was about crossing a line. Michael took a single step forward, not aggressively, not threateningly, but with a presence that commanded attention. The showdown was about to begin. The moment felt like one of those rare instances when time stands completely still. Everything came down to a single breath, a single heartbeat. Michael wasn't tall in the traditional sense, but he carried himself with a presence that spoke volumes. Years of medical training and military service had given him something beyond physical strength, a quiet confidence that filled the entire room. His movements were deliberate, calculated, like a trained dancer who knew exactly where each step would land. The biker leader, a massive guy with arms covered in faded tattoos, didn't expect someone to step forward. Most people would have backed down, would have looked away, but not Michael. His eyes, hardened by years of battlefield experiences, locked onto the troublemaker with a laser-like focus. "This is a medical facility," Michael's voice cut through the tension. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. But it carried the kind of authority that made people listen. The same voice that had calmed wounded soldiers in remote combat zones now addressed the gang in a hospital waiting room. The veterans around the room watched silently. Some leaned forward in their chairs. Others gripped their walking aids. Each of them had seen conflict before, and they recognized the signs of a potential confrontation building up. The bikers' friends spread out, creating a semicircle. Their leather jackets, patches, and intimidating stance suggested they were used to getting their way through physical presence. But Michael had seen real danger. Compared to war zones where a single mistake could cost lives, this felt almost routine. A young nurse standing nearby took an unconscious step back. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her eyes remained fixed on the unfolding scene. Hospital protocols ran through her mind. Keep calm. Don't escalate. Wait for security. The elderly veteran, whose walker had been pushed earlier, remained surprisingly calm. There was something in his posture, a dignity that came from decades of life experience. He'd survived wars, seen global conflicts, and wasn't about to be intimidated by a group of loud bikers. Michael's approach was strategic. He wasn't looking to fight. He was looking to de-escalate. Every movement, every word was carefully chosen. His medical background meant he understood human psychology better than most. Confrontation wasn't about strength. It was about understanding. "This area is for patients and their families," Michael continued, his tone professional but firm. "I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voices and respect the people receiving treatment here." The biker leader seemed momentarily surprised. Most people would have shown fear. Most would have backed down or tried to match his aggression. But Michael was different. His calm was genuine, not forced. Around them, the hospital environment continued its background rhythm. Distant medical equipment beeped. Someone coughed. A phone rang softly at the reception desk. But the waiting area had become a battlefield of its own, a test of wills, of respect, of basic human decency. The veterans exchanged knowing glances. They recognized something in Michael, that same spirit of protection, of standing up for others, that had defined their own service years. This wasn't about proving who was tougher. This was about maintaining dignity. The biker's friends started shifting uncomfortably. Michael's calm was more intimidating than any show aggression could have been. He wasn't just a hospital worker. He was someone who had seen real conflict, who understood the true meaning of courage. And then, in that charged moment, the biker leader had to make a choice. Back down or push forward. Everything hung in the balance, balanced on the edge of a knife. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Everyone knew something was about to break. Not just in the physical sense, but in that invisible space where tension becomes action. The biker leader wasn't used to being spoken to like this. His entire life had been about projecting toughness, about never showing weakness. Growing up on tough streets, he'd learned that backing down meant losing everything. But Michael was different from anyone he'd encountered before. His tattoos told stories of hard living. Each ink marked a memory of some road trip, some fight, some moment that defined his world. But standing in front of Michael, those tattoos suddenly felt like childhood drawings compared to the quiet strength radiating from the military medic. "Who do you think you are?" The biker's voice was a low growl designed to intimidate. But Michael had heard real threats in war zones where one wrong move could mean death. This felt almost like background noise. The veterans in the waiting area watched carefully. Some were in wheelchairs, some with walking aids, but their eyes were sharp. They recognized a confrontation brewing and understood the dynamics better than anyone else in the room. An older veteran with a prosthetic leg adjusted his position slightly. His eyes never left the scene, decades of military training keeping him alert. He'd seen conflicts more serious than this in places most people couldn't pronounce. Michael's body language was telling its own story. He wasn't trying to appear tough. He was simply present, completely, absolutely present. His hands were relaxed but ready. His stance was open but protected. Every movement suggested he knew exactly what he was doing. "This is a place of healing," Michael responded, his voice calm, but carrying an underlying steel. "People here are recovering, dealing with their own battles. They don't need additional stress." The biker's friends started shifting uncomfortably. Something about Michael made them uneasy. It wasn't just his physical presence. It was something deeper, a sense of genuine confidence that couldn't be faked. A young nurse nearby gripped her clipboard tighter. Hospital protocol ran through her mind. De-escalate, protect patients, wait for security. But something told her this situation was different. Michael wasn't just following protocol. He was handling something much more complex. The biker leader took a step forward. It was a classic intimidation move, getting into someone's personal space, trying to make them feel small. But Michael didn't move. He didn't flinch. Years of medical training and military experience had taught him that true strength wasn't about physical size. Around them, the hospital continued its rhythm. Distant machines beeped. Someone coughed. The air conditioning hummed. But the waiting area had become a different world, a space where unspoken rules of respect were being challenged. The elderly veteran, whose walker had been pushed earlier, watched silently. There was something in his eyes, a recognition, a respect for what was unfolding. He'd seen similar moments in war, where leadership wasn't about shouting, but about maintaining dignity. One of the biker's friends muttered something under his breath. Another shifted his leather jacket, revealing a glimpse of what might have been a weapon. The tension cranked up another notch. But Michael remained unchanged. His eyes, which had seen battlefield wounds, which had comforted dying soldiers, which had witnessed humanity at its most vulnerable, now focused entirely on the biker leader. This wasn't just a confrontation. This was a moment of truth. a test of character. And nobody in the room knew exactly how it would end. The next few moments would change everything, though nobody realized it yet. Michael understood something profound about human behavior. Conflict isn't won through physical strength, but through psychological understanding. His years treating wounded soldiers had taught him that every person carries invisible wounds, stories that drive their actions. The biker leader's body language screamed aggression, but his eyes told a different story. Beneath the tough exterior was someone desperate to prove something. Michael could read people like medical charts. Every movement, every twitch was a clue. "You think you're tough." The biker's voice cracked slightly, revealing something beneath the surface. Anger. Frustration. Something deeper than this moment. Around the room, veterans watched silently. Some leaned forward in their chairs, their own complex histories written in scars and weathered faces. They recognized a different kind of battle brewing, one not fought with fists, but with something more powerful. Michael took a calculated breath. His response wouldn't be about winning or losing. It would be about understanding. "I've seen real trouble," he said quietly. "Places where life and death balanced on a single moment. This isn't trouble. This is a choice." Those words hung in the air, heavy with unexpected wisdom. The biker leader momentarily looked confused. Nobody had ever responded to his aggression with such calm perspective. A veteran in a wheelchair shifted, watching intently. His missing legs told stories of sacrifice most people would never comprehend. And he recognized something special happening. A confrontation being transformed into something else entirely. The hospital staff watched, collectively holding their breath. Security was on its way, but something more important was happening. This wasn't just about removing troublemakers. This was about human connection. Michael continued, his voice maintaining that perfect balance between firmness and compassion. "Every person here has a story. Those veterans, they've given everything for people they'll never meet. This space is sacred. It's about healing." Something unexpected started happening. The biker's aggressive stance began to crack. His friends, who moments ago looked ready to escalate, now looked uncertain. The psychological warfare Michael was conducting was precise. He wasn't attacking. He was reflecting, showing the biker leader a mirror of his own potential, revealing choices beyond aggression. An older nurse, who had seen countless hospital dramas, watched with quiet amazement. This wasn't a technique they taught in medical school. This was something deeper, a human skill beyond professional training. The biker's tattoos, which moments ago seemed threatening, now looked like faded stories waiting to be understood. Michael's gaze wasn't judgmental. It was curious, compassionate. "You came here looking for a fight," Michael said softly. "But fighting takes more energy than understanding. Which one do you really want?" The waiting room became absolutely silent. Even the background hospital sounds seemed to pause. The biker leader stood frozen, caught between his rehearsed aggression and an unexpected human connection. Everything he knew about confrontations was being rewritten in this single moment. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The entire situation balanced on a razor's edge of potential transformation. And then, something extraordinary was about to happen. Hospital security arrived like a well-orchestrated dance. 2 officers, trained in handling complex situations, moved with a precision that spoke of years of experience. But what they found wasn't what they expected. Instead of a full-blown confrontation, they discovered a scene of unexpected calm. The biker gang, moments ago ready to create chaos, now stood almost deflated. Michael stood at the center, not as a conquering hero, but as someone who had just navigated a complex human moment. The hospital administrator, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, watched from the doorway. She'd seen her share of difficult situations, but this was different. Something fundamental had shifted in the room. Local police were called, following standard protocol. But this wasn't going to be a typical incident report. The officers who arrived could sense something unusual had occurred. The veterans in the waiting area sat a little straighter, a quiet pride evident in their postures. Documentation began immediately. Each staff member was asked to provide a statement. Michael remained calm, his medical training showing in how precisely he described the events. No drama. No exaggeration. Just clear, factual reporting. The biker leader looked different now. The tough exterior had cracked, revealing something more vulnerable. His friends, who moments ago seemed ready to fight, now looked uncomfortable and uncertain. An unexpected twist was emerging. The hospital's security footage would show something rarely seen, a confrontation dissolved not through force, but through understanding. The veteran community heard about the incident quickly. In these circles, news traveled faster than any official communication. Veteran support groups began discussing the incident, sharing their perspectives, recognizing something profound had happened. Hospital administration faced a decision. This could have been a moment for harsh punishment, for making an example. But Michael's approach suggested a different path, one of understanding and potential rehabilitation. The local police officer taking statements looked intrigued. This wasn't a typical incident report. Michael explained the situation with the same calm he used when treating patients. Clear, compassionate, focused on understanding rather than punishment. One of the older veterans approached Michael after the initial statements were taken. His weathered hand reached out, a gesture of respect that said more than words ever could. They shared a moment of silent understanding. Two people who had seen the worst of human conflict, yet chose to respond with something better. The biker gang members were processed through standard legal channels. But something had changed. The aggressive energy that had entered the hospital had completely transformed. Hospital staff watched Michael with new respect. This wasn't just about stopping a potential conflict. This was about creating a moment of human connection that could potentially change lives. News of the incident would spread, but not in the way anyone expected. It wasn't a story of violence prevented, but of humanity demonstrated. Of someone choosing understanding over aggression. The hospital administrator approached Michael later that day. Her usual stern expression had softened slightly. "That wasn't in any training manual," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. Michael simply nodded. For him, this was just another day of doing what was right, of protecting those who needed protection, of finding humanity in the most unexpected moments. As the day wound down, the waiting room returned to its usual quiet rhythm. But something had changed. A subtle shift had occurred. A reminder that true strength isn't about winning fights, but about understanding each other. And nobody knew exactly how this moment would ripple out into the world. The weeks following the hospital incident weren't what anyone expected. What seemed like a moan of tension had transformed into something much larger, a catalyst for unexpected change. Local veteran support groups began talking about Michael's approach. In community centers, coffee shops, and veteran halls, people shared the story. It wasn't about heroics. It was about something deeper, understanding, compassion, and the power of human connection. Surprisingly, 2 members of the biker gang started showing up at veteran support programs. Their initial visits were awkward, filled with uncomfortable silences and suspicious glances. But something had shifted in them. The confrontation at the hospital had triggered something unexpected, a moment of self-reflection. The local community center, typically a quiet space for veterans, began experiencing something unique. Old veterans who might have once judged the bikers now listened to their stories. Some of these bikers had their own complicated histories, broken families, difficult experiences, struggles that weren't so different from veterans' own challenges. Michael remained humble about the entire situation. When local newspapers wanted to interview him, he deflected attention. "It wasn't about me," he would say. "It was about remembering our shared humanity." His colleagues at the hospital watched him differently now. Medical professionals understood something profound had occurred, a de-escalation that went beyond standard training. Michael hadn't just prevented a conflict, he had transformed potential violence into an opportunity for understanding. The veteran community recognized something special. They knew conflict. They understood tension. But what Michael demonstrated was a different kind of strength, one that didn't require physical confrontation to prove a point. Veteran support groups started discussing Michael's approach in their training sessions. How do you handle conflict? How do you see the human being behind the aggressive behavior? These became serious discussion points. The biker gang itself underwent a surprising transformation. Their reputation in the community started changing. Some members began volunteering at veteran support programs. Others started attending counseling, addressing underlying issues they'd ignored for years. Local law enforcement noticed the change. The incident wasn't just resolved. It had created a ripple effect of positive community engagement. The aggressive group that once caused problems was now contributing to community support. Michael continued his work at the hospital, unchanged by the attention. For him, this was simply about doing what was right, treating people with respect, understanding that everyone carries a story, often hidden beneath tough exteriors. The elderly veterans who witnessed the original incident became unexpected advocates. They would tell the story not as a tale of confrontation, but as a lesson about human potential for change. Community leaders began inviting Michael to speak at events, not as a hero, but as someone who demonstrated a powerful approach to conflict resolution. Schools, community centers, veteran support groups all wanted to understand his perspective. What fascinated people most was the lack of judgment in Michael's approach. He didn't see the bikers as villains. He saw them as human beings with complex histories, potential for growth, and a need for understanding. The local police department even started incorporating aspects of Michael's approach in their conflict resolution training. Understanding over aggression, communication over confrontation. As months passed, the incident became more than a story. It became a powerful example of how a single moment of compassion could transform lives. How understanding could be more powerful than any show of force. Michael would simply smile when people asked him about that day. "We're all fighting our own battles," he would say. "Sometimes, the most important battle is understanding each other." 2 years had passed since that transformative day at the hospital. The world continued spinning, but something fundamental had changed in the local community, a subtle shift that began with one moment of unexpected understanding. The Veterans Support Center had become something more than just a gathering place. It was now a bridge between different worlds: veterans, former bikers, community members who once would have never crossed paths. Michael's approach had created something magical, a space where people's past didn't define their future. Some of the bikers who had been part of that original confrontation now volunteered regularly. They helped veterans with home repairs, drove elderly patients to medical appointments, and participated in community healing programs. Their tattoos, once seen as symbols of rebellion, now told stories of personal transformation. Michael continued his work at the hospital, unchanged by the attention he received. For him, this was never about being a hero. It was about seeing the humanity in every person who walked through those doors. His military training had taught him that true strength wasn't about winning fights, but about understanding people. The local community began recognizing that healing happens in unexpected ways. Schools started inviting Michael to speak about conflict resolution. Police training programs incorporated his approach of understanding over confrontation. Community leaders saw how one moment of compassion could create lasting change. An unexpected support network had emerged. Veterans who once felt isolated found connection. Former tough guys discovered vulnerability wasn't weakness. Families torn apart by misunderstandings slowly began rebuilding bridges. The elderly veterans who witnessed the original hospital incident became unexpected storytellers. They would share the story not as a dramatic confrontation, but as a lesson about human potential. In community centers and veteran halls, their narratives became powerful teachings about respect and understanding. Michael's approach challenged everything people thought they knew about conflict. He didn't see people as good or bad, but as complex human beings carrying invisible wounds. Each interaction was an opportunity for growth, for connection, for healing. The biker gang that once represented trouble had transformed. Some members went back to school. Others started small businesses. They became living proof that people can change when given understanding instead of judgment. Local support groups began documenting their journey. What started as a potential violent confrontation had become a blueprint for community healing. Workshops, training sessions, and community programs emerged, inspired by that single moment in the hospital waiting room. Veterans who struggled with isolation found new purpose. Former bikers discovered community service. Families torn by misunderstandings slowly rebuilt their connections. The ripple effect of that single moment continued expanding. Michael would often say that everyone fights battles nobody sees. Some battles are external, in war zones or hospital corridors. Some are internal, struggles with identity, purpose, belonging. The most important fight is always about maintaining our shared humanity. The community had learned something profound. Strength isn't about being tough. It's about being willing to understand. About seeing beyond surface appearances. About recognizing that everyone carries a story worth hearing. As years passed, the story became more than a local legend. It became a testament to human potential. A reminder that change begins with a single moment of genuine connection. That compassion is more powerful than any show of force. In the end, it wasn't about a medical professional stopping a confrontation. It was about creating a moment of human understanding that would continue resonating, transforming lives in ways nobody could have predicted. And it all started with one person choosing to see humanity instead of conflict.